Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I'm Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Ripley episode 1. It's called A Hard Man to Find. So I'll start spoiler free, but this is based on a pretty famous book. There's been movies based around this before, one with Matt Damon from like the late 90s, early 2000s, something around there. And I have seen none of those versions or read the book or anything. I didn't even really know what the premise of the talented Mr. Ripley is. But this is just called Ripley. It stars Andrew Scott as the lead character. And I'll just mention as well before I get into this is a sponsored review. This is a Patreon tier review. So thanks to Fletcher for subbing and picking this, which is not guaranteed to be what I continue with. He's having me do one episode of two different shows and then deciding what to continue with after. But Ripley was one of the shows that I'm trying out for him. And I think the biggest selling point when he was telling me about this show, not that anything else sounded bad, Andrew Scott's a fine actor, it looked pretty because it's in black and white, so it's very stylized visually, even just from the posters and whatnot. But I noticed the director of the show is Steve Zalian, or Steven Zalian. He was the director and one of the writers on The Night Of from HBO, which was all up and down in quality overall as a show from start to finish, but the direction, particularly in the pilot of that show, the first episode, was maybe one of the best directed first episodes of any TV show I'd ever seen. Like, I was floored by that first episode, and the rest of it almost just couldn't live up to how good that first episode was. It did have some high points later on, but nothing quite matched that first episode. So when I saw that name and that he was directing this entire show, it definitely piqued my interest more than anything else. I don't really have any attachment. Like I said, I've not seen or read any version of the story before, but seeing that name, it got me paying a bit more attention. So, I'll start spoiler free because it is a first episode. But I mean, I don't know where this is going, other than maybe some guesses I have. But I like fundamentally, by the end of the first episode, it's kind of just setting up what the premise of the show is. So there's not too much to spoil, really, but I will keep it vague as I give some impressions, and then I'll give the spoiler warning before I mention the rest. But even if you haven't watched it yet, you might not find it too spoilery anyway. Although that said, I will talk about specific moments and how they handle certain things, and maybe that'll be spoilery depending on how you feel. But yeah, so just to start, spoiler-free impressions. And it's exceptionally well directed. It looks gorgeous pretty much the entire time. It's a very slow-paced, methodical thriller, I guess. I mean, it does start with a little tease of like later on in the timeline, somewhere I assume towards the end of the story, and then comes back 6 months to how it all started, with Ripley living in New York City, and he's basically a con artist who fakes identities to try and just con money out of people, pretty much by claiming to be from a collection agency, and that people oh, you still owe $40 for this medical bill, or you still owe this for this chiropractor bill, whatever it may be. And he just tries and cons people that way. And we see him methodically going through a little bit of this process over the first like third or so of the episode. But he pretends to be other people. That's ultimately what he's doing, and he's doing it to just make money, right? That's what he is. And this episode sets up kind of the longer story of the show, where those skills will be put to a much bigger task. But it is very, very pretty. It's very well directed, and it treats all the moments. There's not a lot of dialogue from a lot of these scenes. Like, obviously, there's key moments where he does meet with people and there's conversations, but a lot of this, especially early on, is him just going about his plan, and the visuals alone are telling you what he's doing. You understand what he's doing at a certain point. A good example is very near the start of the episode. He makes a trip across the city to go to this apartment or a chiropractor's office specifically, which is at the bottom of a building. And he basically walks up to the door just as the postman, or the mailman for the Americans, is at the door right next door, and he basically just waits there as if he's about to put keys in until the mailman comes over and he says, "Oh, what good timing," and just like takes the mail from him because he wants to steal one of the letters so that he can then forge his own version of something from it to con someone. And that little moment of like, what's he doing here? He's just standing at the door, and it's all just a ruse so that this mailman will just hand him the letters, so he gets his hands on them without ever showing identification. He just, because I think we've all had this probably at some point where you're coming home or you're just going out the door, and the postman's there, and they'll just hand you what they're about to put in the door because they see you coming out. It's kind of like that, but just just fudged enough that he didn't actually prove that he lived there or that he worked there or whatever. So it's just a good example early on of how the show visually tells its story as we go throughout. What's funny though is that because it is so visual and because it is so quiet for long stretches, I feel like it might end up being a short review. Maybe not this first one because it's got all the setup, but going forward, I could potentially see it being a less to talk about kind of show, even though what it's doing is very good by and large. At least this first episode is. Like I don't know if I'll like the overall story, although certainly by the end of this episode, it feels like it sets up its goal and what the character is trying to do by the end. But the basic premise, beyond just what he is to begin with, is that he gets an offer to go and try and talk some rich guy's son into coming home. He's some rich guy's son is living off of his trust in some small seaside town in Italy, and the dad wants him to come home, and he won't respond to beyond just sending postcards. So he wants Tom Ripley, who he's heard is a friend of his son's, which I'll be honest, as the episode went on, I was never really sure if that was even remotely true. Because Ripley's reactions don't really feel like it is true, and even if it is, when he claims that he met him once at a party like years ago, it kind of feels like, is he just making that up because he doesn't remember? It feels like he kind of does. So, regardless, that's how he ends up getting asked to do this, and that leads what the rest of the plot's going to be. But I found it to be very well paced. I imagine some people will find it a bit too slow in the way it treats things, but it's very much to my taste in the way it kind of takes its time, especially with this character who's pulling little con jobs. If I can compare it to like a Better Call Saul, which I think is a good comparison point, just because the schemes he's pulling are a little bit like something Jimmy McGill might pull, although it's treated and filmed a little bit more like how Mike would do things in Better Call Saul, where you're seeing parts of the plan and then you can sort of see it all come together and understand what he's trying to do. Interestingly, as far as like developing the character goes, a lot of the first half of the episode is trying to get across the motivation as to why he's going to accept this job, this like weird job to go to Italy and try and find this guy, because while he's shown to be quite slick at what he's doing, the show doesn't make him look like he's perfect at it. Like, he is on a clock where eventually he will be caught. There's moments where he has to make calls to maybe abandon a plan, or it seems like someone might be following him, that kind of thing. Someone who's maybe like realized what he's doing and trying to like capture him, or surveillance, that kind of thing. So it makes sense that he wants to take this other job and get away from kind of the day-to-day crimes that he's doing. Like, there's enough motivation to kind of like sell that idea. Obviously, by the time it goes into full swing, he clearly has bigger aspirations by the end of the episode, which we'll get into. But performances are solid. Andrew Scott, of course, I mean, I've heard him with an Irish accent, which I assume is his natural accent. I could be wrong, I didn't check. But his American accent's not bad. I wouldn't say it's perfect. I definitely heard a little bit of his accent slipping through, I think, once or twice, but nothing too egregious, certainly. I think he is a little bit awkward. Like, again, like, it'd be very easy to like sell this guy as this ultra criminal mastermind who's super slick all the time. But sometimes he puts himself in a position in this episode where he is a little uncomfortable, or he's a little bit out of his depth because he's suddenly in Italy and he doesn't speak a word of Italian. So he's just really hoping, and like, he feels kind of like isolated at some points where he's just on a street by himself and he doesn't know where he's going. He has to rely on this bus is going to come, but it feels like very, like, I'd be scared to be in that situation in a city I don't know, surrounded by people who don't speak the same language. Like, I would feel so isolated and helpless. And he puts himself in these positions where he's very vulnerable, but clearly he does have a goal in mind that he's trying to get to. And even some of the awkward interactions he has when he finally meets some of these characters that he's looking for in Italy So yeah, I think those elements are interesting and give it a bit more depth as opposed to he's just the ultra slick sort of spy type mastermind who's trying to steal people's lives and whatnot. Like, I think that would be fine. There's nothing wrong with doing a character like that, but I think what makes this character more interesting to me from this first episode, again, not knowing that this might be how he's portrayed in every single version of the story, for all I know. But these moments where he feels like he is actually kind of flubbing it, or a little out of his depth, are adding a bit more to the character for me and kind of enjoying though he might fail here. It's not guaranteed that he's going to pull this off. It would be satisfying if he does pull it off, but it feels like he could mess it up and have to try and worm his way out of a moment or something. So yeah. So I'll say spoilers then from this point on, so I can just talk about some specific moments. The big one early on is that he does a whole like scam where he's trying to like get someone to pay for a bill they've already paid, and he's pretending to be from a collections agency. And they do a few interesting things throughout this little span of the episode to show that he isn't in the best place to be doing this, and clearly like this is not sustainable. One is that when he makes a phone call pretending to be from this agency asking for this money, he's constantly having to like shut doors because the communal shower area is like right next to where the phone is, and people are making noise. And obviously if you were getting a phone call from this kind of place, there wouldn't be noises of a shower in the background and things like that. So he's trying to like dodge people who are walking past him. He's shutting these doors. He's trying to avoid the noise getting onto the phone. So that was like effective on its own right for showing that, oh, this is like really a struggle, and he's not in the best place to even be pulling this off. He's in this crappy little studio apartment. He doesn't even have his own bathroom. He doesn't have his own phone, which admittedly it's like the early 60s or whatever. So like maybe that was more common at the time, but still, he's struggling to sort of keep pulling this off, which is one motivation to maybe like sort of give this specific stuff up and try something new. The other thing is that this one fails. You know, he gets the check in the PO box that he's got. He takes it to the bank. He dresses up like the person he's supposed to be for this check to clear. And he goes to the bank and tries to cash it. And she asks for ID, and he shows her the ID, and she sort of glances at it, and she's like, "I'll be 1 minute, sir." And she walks over to the manager, and you can kind of see him, and he, like the whole scene, like it takes a good minute of Ripley standing there, and he's pretending that he's cool, and he's smiling back at her when she looks over at him, and it's all just playing out nice. And then he glances over at the security guard and realizes this could be going south. So he basically just has a big sigh after like a minute of contemplating it and realizing, no, the manager's getting on the phone. I think he's calling the police, or he's calling someone to check if this identity's been flagged as stolen or suspicious or whatever. And he just has to walk out casually like nothing. He had to just abandon the plan. So things aren't going well. Like his schemes aren't even always working. And I think showing him fail early on is smart to me, because it makes him like, okay, he's not just going to be successful all the time. Because I think there is a danger of presenting a character like this who just feels like he's ultra cool and is always getting away with things. This episode at least wasn't scared of showing that he's not good at stuff. Like later on, there's a scene where he's having lunch with the I'll call him the Mark, but Dickie Greenleaf, the guy that he's sent to go and like find. He's having lunch with him and his girlfriend, who's played by Dakota Fanning. She's Marge, and the guy says, "Do you like so and so?" And he hesitates because he clearly doesn't know what this thing is. And frankly, I don't know what this is either. It sounds like an art thing, but he doesn't know what it is. So he just kind of hesitates and then says, "Yeah, sure." And it shows you in the visuals that Marge is not convinced, that Marge has noticed that moment of hesitation and is maybe recognizing that this guy is... And don't get me wrong, this moment isn't that suspicious. It just kind of plays off as like he didn't know what he was talking about. He didn't want to like look dumb, so he just pretended that he did. This just plays of like someone being insecure and trying to hide the fact that they didn't know something. It doesn't make him look like he's up to something bad here yet. Like it's not like he presented himself as an expert in the field or anything like that. He's just trying to look good. But there's another moment as well where he's picking up clothes that the rich like parents have picked out for him, and he's picking the bathrobe. There's like 3 choices, and one of them is burgundy, but he says, "I'll have the maroon one," and the guy, the tailor's like, "Oh, you mean the burgundy one? And he's like, yeah, burgundy. And he gets kind of embarrassed as he says burgundy that the last time. He's like, he's embarrassed that he's being corrected. And it feels like he didn't have to be embarrassed there. It's close enough colors, like whatever. Like just like, yeah, that's the one. But he clearly gets a little uncomfortable that he's shown his hand that he doesn't belong here. He doesn't belong in this world. And I guess if anything else, this story's about him trying to come out of this ultra low class that he's in and trying to cheat his way into the upper class. And any sign that he doesn't belong there makes him uncomfortable, and he tries to hide it and cover it up. But we, the audience, can see that he's struggling, and the characters in the scene sometimes can see that he's pretending that he's struggling. So that stuff's pretty effective. But of course, it's a private investigator or detective who tracks him down. An actor who I like from Fargo season 2. What's his name here? Alvin McCarran. But he shows up and sort of says, "Hey, I've been looking for you. Mr. Greenleaf wants to speak to you." But there's also a guy in a mustache that's following him. There's a great scene where he's on the train in New York, and he's looking through the window across to the other train, and this guy with the hat and the mustache is there. And it's kind of, it's very cinematic, them looking at each other through the windows. The only weird thing about this, and this might not be weird at all, this might make complete sense to people who live in New York and take those trains. I thought it was really weird that both of these trains were going in the same direction and both stopped at the same station. Typically, if a station has two platforms, I'd expect one to always be going, left and one to always be going right. Right? And maybe I'm just used to an underground that's like a circle, it's two tracks going in opposite directions. But this felt strange to me, that two trains would pull into the station going in the same direction. But, I mean, that might make sense, depending on which station it is. Maybe these two tracks sort of divert after this, or whatever, to different parts of the city, in which case, fair enough, they're going different places. But to me, it felt like a weird thing. But it was good for the shot, because both trains were in unison, and they were looking at each other through the windows. So I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Someone who's familiar with the New York train system could tell me if this is forced or just like a natural occurrence, but it felt a bit strange to me from a logistics point of view. Anyway, so after he fails and has to leave the bank and he's down in his luck, he finally goes to see the rich guy, and he's like, "Yeah, my son's over there. Apparently you're one of his friends. We get a postcard, but that's it. We want him to come back, and we can't legally take away the trust now. He's too old. We're not allowed to take it back." So he's offered a salary, he's offered expenses, he's offered his travel expenses all to be paid as well, and he takes this job, right? And we get some of the preparation for it. And the end of the episode reveals what his ultimate goal is, and it's not a surprising goal. I kind of figured that he might want to try and take this guy's identity. This idea that he's got a trust fund that he keeps getting money from rich parents who are on the other side of the planet, in a new location where no one knows who he is and no one's after him. It does seem kind of perfectly ripe for that. But at the same time, I also thought maybe he'll end up liking this guy and want to become a part of his group or whatever, and just keep kind of taking money from the parents for as long as he can, pretending that he's still looking for his son. But the end of the episode makes it clear that no, he's going to try and take Dickie Greenleaf's identity, because he starts practicing his hello in the mirror at the end, which is a good ending for the first episode. It's not a super surprising one, because it's kind of the premise of the whole overall story. I imagine anyone who knows the story is yeah, that's what the whole story is. So obviously that was coming, but I still think it was a good sort of dramatic chapter end to the episode, because it's kind of a statement of intent of this is what he's doing, this is what he's actually up to. But a lot of the journey and him being awkward, when he first meets them, and the awkward silences between them saying, "Hey, it's your old friend, we met at this place years ago." And Dickie clearly doesn't remember him. He's just trying to be nice, but there's an awkward pause between it. It's awkward when they're going up the stairs. There's a kind of a running gag in this episode, actually, in the back half, where Ripley really struggles climbing up and down all the stairs to their home, because it's got a lot of maze-like steps going up all these little back alleyways to get to it. He's awkward at the dinner table when they're having lunch, because he doesn't understand a couple of things but tries to pretend that he does. even when he's saying goodbye to Dickie, and Dickie's like, yeah, if you end up staying here, we can have lunch again. He's like, I look forward to it. And then there's just this awkward pause. You can almost feel the milliseconds pass before he finally says, oh, well, I'll be going then. And he goes off and, finally goes and gets a hotel, which is where the episode ends. But like all of those beats throughout, there was a lot of just awkward little moments. And it feels like Marge picked up on a couple of them where she kind of realized that there's something not quite legit about who Ripley is. So I suspect that her figuring him out or even getting close to him is going to be a big part of the story. And maybe she'll even be the wrinkle that gets in the way of just this plan succeeding. I'm not sure. But even as he's walking around this small like town, this seaside town, he just feels awkward and out of place all the time. Not just when he's walking up and down the steps, but like even when he gets off the bus and the bus drops him off in a weird location. It's like the middle of a bridge, and he has to like find his way down to like some information center or post office so he can like get some directions, but he doesn't speak the language. Like he just looks uncomfortable the entire time, and it feels like the moment at the end when he's in looking at the mirror and starting to like practice being this other person, it feels like maybe part of what we're going to see throughout the show is how he will slowly start to fit in and look like he belongs there, if that's where the story goes. Alternatively, it could be how it doesn't work and he just keeps failing, but we'll see. Obviously as well, actually I should mention the opening. I glossed over it before because I didn't want to spoil it for the spoiler's sake, but the opening of the episode set 6 months later is Tom Ripley dragging a dead body down some stairs. It was very atmospheric, very effective. There's this really kind of furry cat who's sort of watching it all happen. And again, it's kind of clunky where he's not exactly being slick with it. He's just dragging this body down the stairs. And I think that scene was in Rome, I think it said. But that's what we're building up to. I'd have to go back and check who the dead body was. I would presume it was Dickie, but I didn't know who to look for at the time, so I'd have to go back and check. If it was obvious, it might not have been obvious in the visuals. I may have a look at it before if I end up watching episode 2, I'll go back and check that opening scene. Very pleasing as a piece of television. Definitely more of a visual piece than anything else. I think the direction's very good. I think it looks pretty much the entire time. I think the pacing and the sense of detail in the scenes, and this is what I really liked about The Night Of as well, is these little moments where you get what the character's thinking, but the way the camera focuses on certain things, it draws your eye to certain parts of the frame to think about, whatever. Also, I feel like I recognize the bank he went to, the one that he walks out of. I'm sure I've seen that in a movie. It's probably a famous bank in New York that's been around for a long time. But I'm pretty sure I've seen that exact bank before. The layout of the interior just felt very familiar. But, yeah. So, no, it's a really solid first episode that I think the filmmaking is what really makes it. The story's fine, and I'm sure the story has been readapted many times because it is good and it's got merit, but the filmmaking here is what I like watching this and liking it doesn't make me necessarily think that I'll like any of the movies that have been made about it. Because what I like about this more than anything is how it's directed, it's how it's captured, it's how the information is conveyed. So, yeah, anyway, so we'll see if Fletcher, who's sponsoring this review, wants to keep sponsoring this. Alternatively, he's also got me doing the second episode of Three Body Problem next, so he might decide to get me continuing with that. I don't know which one we'll be continuing. That's up to him. But yeah, so obviously thanks to him for being on that Patreon tier. Thank you to all the patrons for help keeping the content coming. I couldn't do all these reviews at such a consistent basis without the support on Patreon and YouTube memberships and any other way that people can contribute. All of us appreciate. So thank you very much for joining me. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?